after you choose entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship chooses you for the rest of your life. I spent the last, 10 years without having a boss. I can't imagine going back to somewhere where I did.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Smarter Money. My name is Vlad Sherbatov, and today on the show, we have a very special guest. She is a Canadian entrepreneur and marketing sensation. She was named top 30 under 30 marketer by the Marketing Magazine. She is a frequent public speaker and expert on the subjects of entrepreneurship, marketing, and technology. She is an advisor on the board of numerous organizations, and she's the CEO of her company called Willful, which allows people to build a will online and do their estate planning in a very quick and easy way entirely on the internet. Please welcome Erin Bury.
Thanks for having me, Vlad, and thanks for that kind introduction.
Erin, you are a public speaker, you are a writer, you're a marketer, you are a tech expert, and you are a CEO of your company. How do you manage your time?
Great question. Well, I've always been an extremely organized person. So I'd say it's a mix of to-do lists. So I use Asana to manage all of my to-dos across my personal and professional life. I do a lot of time blocking. So I have, X time on X evening set aside for some of my philanthropic projects. And then I would say I work a lot. I'm going to be honest. I think there's, you have to be honest about what a certain career path looks like. And if you're running a startup and you're dipping your toes into these other things, it means that you're not working 9 to 5. And so, especially during the pandemic where there's nothing really else to do, I have to say I spend a lot of time working, but maybe when things open back up, I'll spend more time on patios, drinking wine, and less time on working.
Do you find yourself having to say no more now than you maybe did earlier on in your career?
For sure. And I think I've also shifted my mindset, right? I always looked at Inbox Zero as this award that you get for responding to all of your emails. And I think that I've shifted my mindset over time to be such that you have to be intentional about how you spend your time. And if you just are a slave to your inbox, if you are reactionary instead of proactive about how you block your calendar and how you spend time, you're never going to be effective as a CEO. So I've really moved from that reactive mindset of constantly responding to requests, responding to emails, responding to Slack messages, and moving to more of an intentional space where I'm setting out my executive OKRs and goals and making sure that I've blocked time for those. And then, of course, getting back to people in my inbox. The one thing I would say is when I started out in my career working in the startup space in Toronto and the marketing space, there were so many people who took time to grab coffee with me, to let me pick their brain, to make introductions. So to me, regardless of how busy you get, you have to build in time to give back in that manner. And listen, I'm 35. There are folks who are my mentors who are 10, 20 years ahead of me in my career. But I think it's important as you grow in your career to remember that you should be paying it forward. You should be, giving advice and providing space for people who are coming up behind you. And so I always make it intentional to build frameworks to do that in a way that doesn't take up my entire calendar, whether that's weekly office hours or committing to work with certain organizations. And then it's just being really intentional about saying no and doing it in a kind way. I have a bunch of draft email templates about how I say no. And all of them are just, hey, I'd love to do this thing. I'm heads down on my business. I don't have the capacity or space, but here's someone else in our organization that can do it. Or here's a friend or peer that actually would benefit way more than me. So to me, I always try to have a no, but here's a recommendation for someone else or another resource that you can go to.
That's such a cool idea to have a bit of a list of responses to equip yourself with, because that in itself is a time saver.
Yeah. And I mean, my biggest challenge in life is saying no, because I love being a helpful person. I think I've built a reputation of being someone who is helpful, who always makes time for people, who goes out of their way for people. So to me, saying no feels like I'm a jerk. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. How do you protect your own time? How do you focus on your own time and space, but still make space for people whom you want to help? And to be honest, COVID has been really helpful with this, because even though I have more free time than ever because I'm not going out to networking events, I've realized how much I enjoy just having time on my couch to do whatever I want to do, whether that's working or talking to my family or watching Netflix. And so I've become a lot more protective about how I spend my time, who I spend my time with. And as we slowly phase back into a post-COVID world, I'm trying to remember and bring some of those lessons with me, because it's so easy to default into being on and being busy 24/7.
Now that you are a CEO of your company called Willful, how has that changed where you spend most of your time? Because you were very busy even leading up to that endeavor. Are you still engaged in some of those activities on the marketing side, on the publishing side, or are you mostly focused on developing Willful?
When I started as CEO at Willful about a year after my husband launched it initially, I joined him as co-founder and CEO, and there were three of us. So yes, of course, I was doing the tactical individual contributor work as well as the higher level strategic stuff. But now over the years, the organization has grown to 15 people, and I should not be in the weeds. That doesn't mean that I'm too good for anything. I unload the dishwasher at the office. I do a lot of admin stuff that is below a CEO's pay grade, but it's about having that mentality of being willing to pitch in, but recognizing that I always say to myself, is this $1,000 an hour thing? As a CEO, you should be focused on the high value strategic things. And ultimately, you have three goals as a CEO: attract and retain amazing talent, to execute on your vision, make sure that vision is set and that everyone knows what it is, and make sure there's enough money in the bank. And I should be focusing the majority of my time on those three things, not in the weeds of the tactical stuff, which I should be recruiting a great team to execute on.
So, as we speak about recruiting, I find that the way that your organizational team has come together is pretty interesting, because your title is the CEO of Willful, but it was your husband and who actually had the idea. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but he basically hustled his way through the first year or so of the company, being very resourceful and using the tools at his disposal. And it was only after about a year that he recruited you onto the team, even though you were already involved before that. But can you talk about how did it feel to be recruited by your husband into your startup, and the conversations that you guys had before you decided to go ahead with it?
Well, you've clearly done your research, Vlad, so I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, listen, it was never the intention to join Willful. Prior to the company, I had run a marketing agency for about 6 years. And when I decided to move on from the agency, it was really just because I wasn't feeling challenged anymore. I felt like I had achieved everything I could learn in that role, and it was time for something new. And I was going to just take a few months off, decide what that was, explore opportunities. And I encourage anyone who's really struggling with what they want to do, not to make a list of companies you want to work at, but to write down a list of the things that you loved doing in your past role or that you'd love to have the opportunity to do, and then to see what company or role actually fits those things. So when I made my list, it was, building a brand from the ground up, creating something from nothing, which is my favorite thing to do. Managing a team. I love the operational and HR side of managing people. So I didn't want to go and just be the head of communications or marketing at a company and focus on that. I wanted to have more of an operational lens. And as I started making this list and my husband, Kevin, started reading it, he's like, wait, all of these things you would get to do at Willful. And it was one of those realizations that, oh yeah, if I actually want to have a chance to work on all these things, why not do it at a company that I care about, with a person that I care about? And so it was just kind of a natural evolution of going through that process of figuring out what the heck I wanted to do with my life.
Well, you said something that really resonates, I think, with a lot of entrepreneurs, which is creating something of your own, right? It doesn't have to be huge, but there's a tremendous amount of pride, and I think that's a trait that a lot of entrepreneurs have. And when you look at your career, I mean, similar to your favorite movie series, your past career leading up to Willful was very fast and furious, right? it was you were from your early days at Sprouter when you were exposed to so many different startups and were able to observe them. And then when you moved on to create 88 Creative, you worked on some really serious brands, right? Like the global brands, the Sonys, the Teluses of the world, but also some of the Silicon Valley style tech companies. So you were kind of on your way to that corner office, right? You were making moves. Your career was definitely something that I think a lot of people in your peers probably would admire, right? What is it aside of just the operational aspects? What steered you towards the entrepreneurial path? Because it's a serious move to make, right? And it's a serious decision to make. What would you say steered you in that direction?
I did not grow up wanting to be an entrepreneur. I'm not sure that I even knew what that word meant. I mean, we didn't really have role models for entrepreneurship in the early 90s. And so I always grew up just wanting to emulate my mom's career. She was a marketing executive at Nortel. She got to travel. She got to go to trade shows and parties and dinners and work on advertising campaigns. I was like, this is what I need in my future. So for me, it was, to your point, it was all about that corner office. How can I make a six-figure salary with a corner office at a Fortune 500 company? And it was only when I got my first startup job, which was my second job out of school. I was the second employee at this startup called Sprouter. And my boss, Sarah Prevet, who's still a mentor and friend to this day, she asked me something about what my goal was for my career. And I said, oh, my goal is to make six figures and have a corner office. And she full on laughed in my face. And I was so insulted at the time, but she laughed because she was like, dream bigger. Like that's achievable within 2 years. That's fine. But is that really your definition of success? And an interesting thing happened, which was the more I was exposed to entrepreneurs, the more I interviewed them during my time as a tech journalist, the more that I interacted with them at industry events, the more I fell in love with this path of creating something from nothing, encountering a problem and solving it yourself instead of waiting for someone else to solve it. And most importantly, autonomy, this idea of not having a boss and being able to dictate the way that things move. And the risk to me seemed like such an equal payoff for all of the rewards that came with it. So if I hadn't gone down that path, I probably would be sitting in a nice, cushy corner office at a marketing agency or, somewhere else. But I'm so grateful I was exposed to that, because now I really, after you choose entrepreneurship chooses you for the rest of your life. I mean, I've spent the last, 10 years without having a boss. I can't imagine going back to somewhere where I did.
And I almost feel like if you've worked for some successful companies and you've had a chance to impact some successful companies as an employee over the years, you gain skills, right? You work on yourself, you become more competent, also become more confident. In a way, sometimes starting something of your own and building that up from scratch, it's almost like a self-challenge, right? You're putting, because as long as you're an employee, you can be a very high-paid employee. You always have a bit of a shield around you where you don't have that skin in the game, and which is a completely different feeling that you get from when you're running your own company. How did it feel when that first day when you're like, okay, I'm now the CEO? Did something change, or was it just another day for you in the week?
Well, it's funny. I mean, listen, I think everyone struggles with imposter syndrome and thinking that they're not smart enough and thinking that they're not good enough and that they're going to screw it up. And I certainly thought that the first day of my first full-time job out of school working at a PR agency. And I definitely thought that my first day starting at Sprouter, this tiny startup when I had no startup experience. And I definitely thought that the first day working at my agency where I had never run an agency before. But every time I did it, and I was successful and I built my confidence over time. So the first day at Willful, I still had all those thoughts. Of course, everyone, and for the rest of my career, as I take on big challenges, I'll think there's a little voice in your head that says, you're not good enough, you're going to fail, you're not going to do this. But the voice on the other side drowned it out, which was, but you've been able to do it every single time. So don't you want to give yourself some credit that no matter what the challenge, you'll rise to it and you'll be successful, and that you're also humble enough to know that you don't know everything and that you can seek out advice from business coaches, mentors, advisors, whomever, so that you can fill in the gaps of your own knowledge.
You're so right. And I think people really do experience that imposter syndrome on all levels. Like very senior, very accomplished people that have lots of accolades over their career. I've heard them say the same thing. So it's definitely something that people need to be aware of, that it's normal. It's part of the process. Like, don't be scared of it. In fact, if you do feel it, you're probably on the right track, right? You're not ignorant and you're not overly self-confident. It keeps you in check a little bit, at least for me. So I think that's important.
For sure.
Erin, let's talk about wills. All right. As a marketer, you probably are gotten used to working on some great creative, catchy slogans, products that are exciting and everybody loves to use. In the financial industry, a lot of times the perception is that the products aren't as sexy, right? They're a little bit drier to talk about, not as exciting. Can you talk about the journey of your journey and Kevin's journey as well, and how Willful came to life, and why is that the idea that you decided to pursue?
I think most entrepreneurs start a company to solve a problem that they experienced in their own life, to scratch an itch. And that was certainly the case with Willful. A few years ago, Kevin's uncle passed away quite suddenly, and he had a will, but had never discussed the things outside of it, like funeral and burial wishes. And so, at a time when his family should have been grieving, they were really running around scrambling, trying to find out, had he talked to coworkers about these things? Where had he stored important documents? And it was one of those moments where Kevin thought, wow, this is a really broken process. I wonder what exists out there to simplify estate planning. And so when he looked into it, found that actually estate planning was a pretty antiquated space where there were very few tools. It was driven by appointments in lawyers' offices, lots of paper, physical signatures, expensive processes, and that the majority of people just haven't spent much time not only thinking about their end of life plans, but documenting them to make it easier on the family like us that was left behind. So that was the impetus. And when Kevin came to me and said, I think there's an opportunity to build something here, I said, could you please pick a less sexy business idea? Like wills, really? There's all these things that we could solve in the world, and you want to solve wills? I didn't just say that because of the subject matter. I also said it because of Kevin's background. His background is in trades. He is not an engineer. He is not someone who can code. And so I kind of said to him, like, listen, as a non-technical founder, this is going to be more of an uphill battle for you, knowing that this is not your natural skill set. But he was really passionate about it because he saw it firsthand, that what happens when you don't have a plan in place. And it just kind of became his mission to help destigmatize conversations around death. And at first, I was very passionate about helping him. I've always loved that he's one of those born entrepreneurs. He has an idea every 5 seconds. And so I knew at some point he would start his own business, and wholeheartedly supported him when he went on the path down Willful. Was I passionate about estate planning? That's a big no, because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about the process. And as Canadians, we don't learn much about estate planning. They don't teach it in school. Unless you have parents that are very open about it, you probably haven't spent more than 5 minutes thinking about it. In fact, you've probably avoided thinking about it because people tend to avoid thinking about their own death. So it was really only after watching him for that first year where, as you said, he hustled and did whatever he could to get people on board with his idea, and found lawyers to work with and found developers to build it out. And it was really impressive watching him, just kind of find a way to make it happen, even though there were all of these things stacked against him, that I started to fall in love with the problem and really see how with every will he sold, he was saving a Canadian family from the conversations and unanswered questions that had existed for us. So that's really what made me fall in love with the problem. And now I've become the will girl. Every time there's an article about wills, my friends, family, social media contacts are sending it to me. So yes, this is not where I thought I would be, 15 years into my career, but I couldn't be happier.
You have a very structured personal brand, and you also have your business, which is Willful. Can you talk about the activities that you do, and what's the relationship between Erin Bury, the person, and your personal brand that you've developed through your public speaking engagement, through your thought leadership, through the different boards that you're on where you contribute your opinions, right? You're in the public sphere. And your brand as your company brand, where you're the CEO, how do they interact with each other? And how do you maybe leverage one to promote the other?
It's a great question. And I always get asked by people, what is the intersection of a personal and professional brand? And what happens when that brand changes, right? Because to your point, I've kind of been like a cat with 9 lives with these different careers. I spent time on the founding team at BetaKit and was a tech journalist. I've worked as a marketer at a startup. I've owned an agency. So, I would say the common thread that runs through that is building brands, right? In every role I've ever been in, it's been about building brands and telling stories. And so I think the core of my personal brand is about that. What I apply that to is always changing and always will change. And I wouldn't want it to be prescriptive. So yes, right now I'm very passionate about estate planning. I talk a lot about the challenges with estate planning, and I share fun stories like the dog that was left $5 million in his owner's will. And I try to use kind of interesting pop culture references to help people to actually understand the importance of this stuff.
I'll jump in for 1 second, Erin. A dog was left $5 million by their owner?
Well, that dog's not the richest dog. The richest dog is Gunther III, which is a German Shepherd, obviously. And he has $180 million fortune, which was left to him by his owner, which is now held in trust and managed by these trustees. And I have no idea how they're going to spend $180 million on a dog. But these are the kinds of things where people think estate planning is not sexy or interesting. But when you start saying things like, well, did you know that there was a man in Toronto who held a baby derby in the 1930s where whoever had the most kids in a span of 10 years got his fortune? Like, these are the types of stories from Canadian history that to me are super fascinating. So I think what I've always tried to do with my personal brand is to make sure that it's adding value, right? There's a lot of people who I think just use their social platforms to only ever talk about their company, what they're selling, and they forget that actually building a relationship with people online is about adding value, and then people will actually do the promotion for you. When someone asks about wills, more likely than not, I'm not going to jump in and sell them on Willful. That's way less meaningful than someone in my network chiming in and saying Willful is the go-to. So I try to share a lot of interesting startups and stories and shine a light on other people. And to your point, talk about things like my love for pizza and the Fast and Furious franchise, because those human elements of a personal brand are really what people connect with. And if there's another constant in my personal brand, it's that I'm very open on my social channels. If you know me on social and you meet me, there's not a disconnect. I'm the same person on social as I am in person. And so I really make an effort to be, I hate the word authentic, but real with people online.
No, I think that's so important. And especially we sort of live right now in an age of the Gary V's, right? And that type of, in some cases, social pressure even to be like, hey, if you're in this industry, you kind of have to do these different things. And I think a lot of people find that intimidating. But what are the benefits if you are an entrepreneur and your sole focus is on growing your business? What are some of the specific benefits that you could get if you also focus on developing a personal brand to supplement that?
I think trust and legitimacy are a huge one. If you're scheduling meetings with investors and you get an intro from someone in your network, the first thing that investor is going to do is Google you, look up your LinkedIn. So it doesn't actually matter. You might be using social media only for business, but people are going to vet you for investor meetings, for media interviews, for, customers or sales. And so to me, the first benefit is trust and legitimacy, that they can actually see who you are and understand a bit more about you before saying yes to a meeting. Then the other benefit to me is driving brand awareness and top of the funnel traffic. Every time I'm on a show like this, or every time I, share some content about wills and pets that have been, given millions of dollars, it's shared. And people who have never heard of Willful or don't know anything about wills are inevitably going to learn something about that and be exposed to us. So to me, those are kind of the two biggest ones. But then there's also this personal benefit of building a network. I think it's really easy to focus on the peaks in your career. It's not always as fun to talk about the valleys. But, I was part of a startup that ran out of money and shut down. I was laid off on a conference call from Post Media. I've experienced these valleys in my career. And at those times, my network was 100% the thing that was the most valuable and helped me get through it. So if you are just heads down on building your business and you're not forming these relationships, networking with potential investors, partners, and customers, building some sort of Google presence so that when someone looks you up, they don't think you're a ghost, you can still do it, absolutely, but it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult.
When I think about wills, I kind of couple it into that group of things that we just don't like thinking about. Like I don't want to think about my will. It's the same way as I don't want to think about life insurance, and I don't want to think about saving for retirement. You know what I mean? It's those activities that you kind of have to pay for something or pay attention to now, but you just don't see any benefit of it immediately. So you tend to just put it to the side. And even if somebody comes and tells you, well, you know what, if you put away $25 a week for the next 20 years and you have this much interest accumulate, you're going to have millions of dollars by the time you're 65. It still doesn't sound exciting, right? Just because it's so far away. Do you find that when you market Willful or just when you're dealing with your customers, are you getting a lot of people that are wanting to get a will, they just don't have an accessible, easy way to do that? And that's how they're discovering you? Or is it mostly through educating people about, listen, it's a really good idea to have a will, especially if you are a new parent, for example. You should get it, and here is why. And you have to do that education piece as well to get people to come to that conclusion that, you know what, I do need to take care of it.
Yeah, Vlad, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, which is you can tell anybody that things are a good idea for them to do, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And I'm guilty of this in my own life, right? There's lots of things I know I should do, like build an emergency fund, but you're just maybe not prioritizing it. And wills are very easy to push down the to-do list because there's no sense of urgency, right? You don't have a sign on your forehead that tells you when you're going to die. So to you, it seems like you have decades before you're ever going to need this. Now, we know the unexpected can happen anytime, and it's not that you will pass away tomorrow. It's that these things are important to have in place before you need them. Just like life insurance, it only works if you have it in place before you pass away. So I think, to your point, half of my job is just education about wills. It has nothing to do with Willful. It has everything to do with reducing the stigma around having conversations about end of life, helping people to understand how you can make a will, why you need one, what happens if you pass away without one, what the process is like, and basically just educating people on Wills 101 so that when they are ready to go ahead with the process, maybe we're the one that they choose, maybe not. But ultimately, the mission that we had years ago starting out was to help every Canadian family protect their loved ones with a will. So I hope they choose Willful, but not everyone will be right for us. And ultimately, as long as they create the will, they've still achieved that goal. It's a huge educational curve. And to your point, a lot of it is not helping them to choose Willful. It's helping them to choose creating a will at all.
So when you do have those conversations, what are the main reasons to get a will now and not delay it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we really focus on empathy and empowerment. So we never focus on the fear-based side of it. Like, well, you could die tomorrow, Vlad, so you should get a will because you might drop dead tomorrow. Like, no, never that. To us, it's always the idea of peace of mind and a positive legacy. This idea that having a will means that you have the peace of mind that your family will be taken care of, and also that you're not leaving a mess behind for them to clean up, that you won't be a burden on them, and that you'll leave a positive legacy in their minds and also in the world through things like charitable giving in your will. So we always really try to focus on those two ideas. And then we talk about the tactical things. Hey, Vlad, did you know if you passed away without a will, you're married, you have kids, who do you think that your assets would go to? Do you think that everything would go to your spouse? Because actually the law in Ontario says it would be split between your spouse and kids, and all of that money would be tied up until your kids turned 18. Is that what you want? If not, a will is the best way to make sure that what you actually want to happen happens. So really just educating people with what happens if they don't put it in place.
I think people really underestimate the power of peace of mind, because it is exactly the same reason why you should get the life insurance and you should save for retirement. Because when you have a peace of mind about the future, you free up your mind to do things now. Like, you don't get the instant gratification from those towards the future activities, but you get the ability and you sort of take your handcuffs off to say, I can take a little bit more risk now with my funds because I know that I'm putting $25 away per week for retirement. I can take a little bit more liberty with and be a little bit more proactive, right, and aggressive today, and that will open up new opportunities. So it's so important, so important. I think people underestimate that sometimes.
For sure.
Erin, when I watch your presentations, you use a tactic to deliver your message that is really, really effective, and I think it resonates so well. And that tactic is storytelling. Like, you are a very effective storyteller to a point where it's almost invisible that you're actually delivering a presentation. Can you talk about storytelling as a marketing tactic? How did you learn it? And how are you using it in your day-to-day activities to drive your message home?
Well, first of all, thank you. To me, storytelling is kind of inherent. It's not something I necessarily had to practice. As someone who went to journalism school, who spent time as a journalist and as a marketer, storytelling is just kind of the crux of what you do. You always tell stories. And I think when you're building a company or building a brand, storytelling is kind of integral to talking about the problem you're solving. I never start Willful with, oh, yes, we help you get an online will. I always say it started with a personal experience. And I tell our story because I think it can help people relate. They've had a family member pass away. If not, they will. And so it's much easier to put themselves in our shoes and to think about what they would do in that situation versus clinically delivering facts. So I think storytelling and communicating a message through a story is a way to create an emotional connection with people, to help them imagine that they were in your shoes, and hopefully to be more memorable. If I listed off 10 random facts about estate planning right now, it would be way less memorable than the story about the dog who got left $5 million. And the point might still be the same, that you should plan for your pets in your will, but you're always going to remember it when it's wrapped in a story. So thankfully, I've had the opportunity to work with a really great company called Speaker Labs, which is a Toronto-based public speaking training company. And they're so great at helping you build out stories and to build presentations in a way that, the slides aren't distracting, that the stories are really wrapping up your message. And that, to your point, people actually want to listen to you instead of those presentations we've all been to where either you're trying to read so many words on the slide that you're not listening to the person, or you're zoning out because you're bored, because they're just delivering a million pieces of information to you in a way that doesn't create a narrative.
I really find it fascinating because I think it's a difficult thing to master, but with the people that do have it in their arsenal, have a huge advantage. I'm not one of those people. No, I'm trying to, because that's part of the reason I'm asking that question. I'm trying to learn, see what I can pick up from this. But it's definitely a great skill, and I think for anybody who's coming up in the marketing world or has been doing marketing for a long time, it's such a crucial skill to have.
Just quick shout out, Speaker Labs has an online course because of COVID. So if anyone does want to improve their storytelling or public speaking, they're friends of mine. I swear I don't get a cut.
It's okay if you do. There's nothing wrong if you do. What's wrong with that?
I like to be transparent, but no, they're just good friends, and they're honestly fantastic at the storytelling piece. And I have to say, Vlad, you're one of the best interviewers that I've met. You do your research, you frame things well. So maybe you're a really great storyteller and you need to improve your own confidence on the matter.
It's that imposter syndrome we're talking about. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Erin, in your career, you've really dealt with so many different types of entrepreneurs, even probably before you became an entrepreneur yourself. Can you talk about some of the common traits that you've discovered? And specifically, can you tell us about the blank slate effect?
Yeah. So when I was trying to think about, how I could build a talk around entrepreneurship, I started with this question of, are you born an entrepreneur or do you become an entrepreneur? And I've always thought that the juxtaposition between Kevin, my husband, and I is really different. He's one of those born entrepreneurs who, was starting businesses in middle school and had always encountered problems and saw them as potential businesses, to the point where he called me the dream killer, because every time he'd come home with a harebrained idea, I'd squash it and be like, no, that'll never work. Because I was a tech journalist, I was writing about these things all day. So I'd be like, oh no, I wrote about that last week. Someone's already doing that. And I was the total opposite. As I mentioned, I was not entrepreneurial growing up. I dreamed of the corner office. And so I love this question of, okay, I have become this entrepreneur who was made over time through exposure, through talking to entrepreneurs. I've become the consummate entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin was born that entrepreneur. He already had that mindset. So what are the qualities that we have in common? And the things, I'm sure there's a million of them, but the things I identified were being open-minded. So entrepreneurs really see things as a blank slate instead of seeing them as a prescribed, formula that's already been done. Resourcefulness, which I think is huge. As you mentioned, Kevin literally had no business starting an estate planning company and just was so resourceful to get it off the ground. And you really have to be able to work within constraints as an entrepreneur to find your way. Risk taking, I think, as you mentioned earlier, you have to be willing to take risks as an entrepreneur, and you're innately taking a risk by leaving your full-time job or just, signing those incorporation papers to start a business. But it also means taking risks with your marketing and with how you run your business, because you can't afford to be like the big guys. You can't afford a Super Bowl ad. So you have to take risks on smaller, lesser known platforms. And then finally, just perseverance. I think perseverance is, it looks very glamorous from the outside to grow a company, right? Especially if you're only looking at someone's peaks, the fun times on social media. And I really love when entrepreneurs are honest about the fact that it's really hard. He didn't pay himself for 3 years. I didn't pay myself for over a year when I joined the company. There are lots of dark moments and tons of no's from investors or partners or media or whoever else. And it can be very isolating because you can't always share the realities of it with your team, and your friends and family don't always understand. So persevering through those challenges and really having an attitude of the only way through is through. I'm just got to keep taking one step forward, but the only way to the finish line is just to keep going. So to me, those are the things that kind of tie together this entrepreneurial mindset. And I think you can develop those qualities over time today if you're listening and think, oh my goodness, I do not have all of those things.
Well, absolutely. It's a learning game, right? For sure. I want to circle back to that money piece and the funding in particular, because for your company, Willful, you went through a few different iterations. You started off just kind of being resourceful, as you said, trying to find the right solutions at that time that are low cost. Later on, you got a little bit of help through a Clearbank, which allowed you to expand your spend on digital media. And then just last year, in the middle of a pandemic, you had a VC-backed funding round as well. Can you talk about that experience and what changed in your business as you went through that journey and different partnerships and different infusions of capital?
It's a great question. And I think the biggest thing, if anyone can take anything away from this, it's that taking on funding often means giving up a piece of your company, and it changes the trajectory of how you can run your business and the expected outcomes. And so I think you have to go in eyes wide open when you take on certain types of capital to know what success means to that investor. So we initially had friends and family funding, which was, I wish I could say I had a rich uncle, but it was several friends and family who put in very small amounts of money. So happy to say both of our moms are investors in Willful.
Of course.
And that was just to get off the ground. And that was used so frugally. I mean, that had to last us until we were able to make enough money to pay to keep the lights on and pay for developer contractors and things like that. The next phase was right when I joined the company in early 2019, which was some individual angel investors, most of whom were Shopify executives, as well as an accelerator program that we went through called Founder Fuel, which came with a bit of capital as well. And I think that angel funding was really when we said, okay, let's actually invest in some full-time hires, right? We had kind of been using freelancers and contractors, and that gave us enough of a runway that we could actually invest in full-time team members. And I remember we were on our honeymoon. So we got married in late 2018. We were on our honeymoon in New Zealand and signing the contract with our first full-time employee, our CTO, Matt. And it felt scary because we didn't know how much we'd be making in revenue in a few months, but we did know that we had these investments that would at least give us a buffer. We were cash flow positive actually for many months, for about 8 months until we raised funding. Now we were frugal, but we were cash flow positive. And raising the venture capital funding was really about, okay, do we want to be a lifestyle business? Do we just want to be a very, very small team who runs some Google AdWords and sells some wills, and we get to drink Mai Tais on the beach for a month at Christmas? And we said, no, we want to be a high growth technology company. We think there's the opportunity to build this out into a massive brand. And so we need to be able to invest in our team and in growth to do that. And that's why we intentionally took venture capital funding, knowing that it put us on this path to be a higher growth tech company versus maybe a lifestyle business with some of those other forms of capital. So I'm very happy that we did it. It's the learning that I was looking for out of this experience. But I think other entrepreneurs love bootstrapping, which is just self-funding and never taking a dollar of anyone else's money. And the joy of that versus our path is you have no one to answer to. If you don't have any investors on your cap table, you get to call the shots, you get to decide, and you might grow more slowly. But at the end of the day, if your company sells, you own 100% of it, and you've been able to grow it in exactly the way that you wanted to. So I don't think there's any right path for fundraising. I think it's really about what's our goal for this company long term, and does that align with the expectations of the outcome that would be required for each of these types of investors?
You mentioned signing up documents on your honeymoon. Starting a business with your good friend will put your friendship to the test. What about starting a business with your spouse?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think building Willful together has actually brought us closer together, because I am someone who, when I'm involved in something, I'm in it 110%, right? Like, I spend every waking moment thinking about Willful, except when I'm playing the guitar, as we chatted about. It's my one hobby that distracts me, or reading books, which is also a very great way to have some downtime and not think about work. But I work all the time, and I'm always thinking about it, and I always want to talk about it. And the best thing in the world is that I live with my co-founder. So if it's 11 p.m. on a Saturday and we're in the middle of a movie and I have this thing that comes to my mind, I can pause it and turn to him and we can jam on it. The hardest part about it is setting boundaries, because sometimes he's the one with an idea at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, and I'm like, can we have one day, please, that is not about the business? And I also love that we always talk about this not as a family business, but as something that really is kind of the story of our family, where our moms are investors. A few of our best friends either work for us or they're investors in the company. We have friends on our advisory board, all of whom have helped to build the Willful story. So it really does feel like it's embedded in our family and personal life as much as it is in our professional life.
Erin, you've given such open and clear answers to all the questions. I want to once again thank you for making the time to speak with me today. And if somebody wants to learn more about yourself or your company, Willful, where should they go?
Yeah, so you can reach me on any social network at Erin Bury. And you can reach Willful at willful.co. And I really appreciate you having us on the show. We're really excited to be partnered with your team. And thanks for everything you do to reduce the stigma around money.
Absolutely. It's a great pleasure. Once again, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Vlad. You too.
Take care, Erin. Bye-bye.